Hello, Jess. A huge welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Well, as you know, it's been quite an eventful beginning. This is our third time, which we hope is third time lucky. Um, but I am delighted to be having this conversation we're due to have. As I said to you before we started recording, it's, I believe, the first time we've talked about this like very specifically on the show before. It's obviously been woven into different conversations before. I'm pretty sure it's the only time we've had this specific conversation, so I'm really looking forward to this.
No pressure.
It can't be any worse than all the events that have happened, which have all been on my side, so yes,
Yeah.
no pressure at
No, I've
all.
been looking forward to this. Yeah. Yeah, this should be good.
So I would love to know how you came to be passionate about, do the work you do, to arrive here having this conversation with me. I'd love to know.
Yeah, it has been a bit of a lifelong journey, I suppose. So I'm sure, a lot of people who are interested in spiritualism and kind of, anything related to it will kind of have similar stories. We were the kids that were mixing potions in the garden from a young age and running around with sticks that were magic wands. I think I first became aware that there was a term for it when I was about 13. So I grew up, before the internet was commonplace. So, we mostly had books and magazines. And I think it was through a magazine article in one of those teenage magazines that I first learned about paganism and witchcraft. And that really kind of piqued my interest and just sounded like there was a term for everything that I believed. Like this wasn't just me, there was something out there. So that kind of started a lifelong learning, I suppose. So it's been over 20 years now, but I've considered myself kind of practicing since the age of 13 in a more kind of, named capacity. But I mean, in that time, just experienced so many different things, tried things that didn't work, tried things that I absolutely loved. I think I've got a real interest in divination. I personally practice something that I ascribe to as water witchcraft. So I work very closely with the element of water, very interested in energy healing in general as well. So that forms a large part of my practice and has done for years. So yeah, I wouldn't say there was kind of a defining moment other than that when I was, 13 and reading that article. But yeah, throughout that time, I've worked with loads of different people, groups, studied loads of different traditions and different kind of ways of working and cultures. And yeah, still a lot to learn, but it's definitely feels like it's been one of those kind of lifelong journey-esque sort of things to get to the
Mm,
point where I am now.
wonderful. I find it so interesting how, and maybe there's a bit of this in your journey, but I find there's two distinct kind of like archetypal paths that those of us that kind of are in this, magical spiritual world, and some of them kind of seem to take the path where it's a little bit more, you know it from an early age and stay on it, and then
Yeah,
some that are more like my path where there was a kind of real divergence where we like almost like completely shoved it away, and
yeah,
then one way or another it came back to us, often in quite a sort of spontaneous, forceful, surprising
yeah.
way. And I find it really interesting, kind of like the way that like it's usually like mostly one or mostly the other, and it sounds like you're more the former, which I always have a little bit of envy about. Like it's kind of like, oh, it'd been so nice just to, like, to have kept on doing all those things I was interested in rather than having the break. But hey, we have the path we're meant to have, don't we?
Exactly. Yeah. I do feel quite lucky that I did kind of pick it up and stick with it early. But yeah, as I said, there's still so much to learn that I think, even in another kind of
Mm,
35 years, there'll still be so much more to kind of focus on. But yeah, we all start somewhere and we all get to where we need to be when we need to be. I am a big believer that the universe does know what's best for us, and whether
yes.
we acknowledge it or not at the time, it is leading us down the path that we're meant to be on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, which of course brings us actually quite nicely to the topic of divination, in that kind of recognition that it is giving us that insight as to kind of what the patterns that may unfold. which I think the more we're used to looking back at our past and connecting the dots backwards, as Steve Jobs famously said, I think the more we start to have this appreciation of like, perhaps there's some pattern to all of this. Perhaps there's a way of foreseeing that pattern, which often I think those of us that are more open to other realms often sort of spontaneously start to see kind of what's going to happen in the future. But of course, part of the role, not the only role, part of the role of divination is to, for an intentional reason, have an insight into kind of what may be. And so I'd love to know, first of all, like your own relationship to that topic of divination as a whole, just like very simply. I don't expect this like perfect definition, but just like, what does it mean to you? Like, why is it something that you've been especially drawn to?
So I think something that's quite interesting, and you kind of touched on it there, is that we always assume divination is about looking to the future. I mean, often when you kind of, use divination, you've got a very specific question in your mind, like, what's going to be the end result of this situation? And we're always kind of looking at what is that fixed future state? What can I expect? But we very rarely kind of focus on the here and the now, or even the past. And I know, divination by its very nature is supposed to be kind of looking to the future. But I think it's quite interesting when you look at the difference between saying, I want to know exactly what happens in my future at the end of this, and I want to know the actions that I can take now to get to my best future self, if that makes sense. And I think once you kind of start thinking about it more in a sense of, I'm not looking to understand what the end state is here, what the end goal is, but I'm more looking to understand, regardless as to what that end state is, what that end goal is, again, that trusting in the universe to make sure I follow the right path for me. I think for me personally, starting to use divination in such a way that focuses more on that, what are the steps that I should take regardless of the situation to make sure I get to the best outcome, was really a bit of a game changer in the way that I approach divination and use divination. And I think that to me kind of sparked this interest in divination and the different methods that you can use for divination, and more kind of looking at it as I suppose, a self-help tool, and a tool that can be used in healing and such, rather than a future telling, fortune telling kind of usage, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And this I love the fact that we've kind of like landed right where I was kind of hoping the conversation would go, because that's very much how I relate to it. It very much is as a tool of self-illumination, a tool kind of that works very nicely alongside healing and alchemy, as opposed to fortune telling. It's really, for me, is all about that, even though I know it has a different role. And I think
Yeah.
coming to that kind of deeper context for this conversation, when it's not just using divination for us personally, but using it as people who have roles of, some form of change work, healer, guide, coach, therapist. As we start to use that in our work with others, it then, that kind of like, it almost necessitates that way of relating to divination. How does this support us in supporting the person in front of me, that client, student, in understanding who they are, where their soul's calling them to, and the actions that they need to take, they need to proactively, sovereignly take in service of that healing. And that for me is the, if there was a real intention I had for this show, it's to invite people listening that are already in those roles to see the power of divination in using it that way. And so I love the way we've kind of like dive straight into, without me even needing to. It's kind of like, that's where I see it has absolute gold. And is something, again, because I think the very notion of divination has been kind of in this realm of, like it's sort of a bit of a cliche, crystal balls and tea leaves. And funny enough, I had a
Yeah.
tea leaf explosion, a tea bag explosion just before this call. And so it's kind of like, if we're doing, even if we're working in kind of like magical realms, magical work, there's a part of it that's almost like, and yet I want to be seen to be taken seriously. And so I think there is like a real reclamation of being able to use divination in this way that we're talking about, where it has like a kind of real place in the heart of that kind of healing work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think when I started to do divination readings for other people than just myself, that really became apparent. And I'd find that people would often ask for readings or help when they were going through quite a big, significant life change. I mean, so, often when you're reading for yourself, it can just be, how's this going to go at work tomorrow? Or, things that are, for all intents and purposes, quite kind of small and mundane. But I think it is really interesting that most of the people that I've kind of done readings for, especially to support, kind of healing or just them in general, it's mostly been because they are going through this kind of big, quite often traumatic change, and just kind of need that guidance and support. And I think one of the things that's really interesting as well, combining divination with things such as energy healing, is a lot of people really kind of thrive off the visual. You'll get some people who, they thrive off the visual, some people who prefer audio. And something like energy healing can feel a bit inaccessible and untangible, especially for maybe people that are new, people that are still kind of getting to grips with things, this kind of connecting with this energy that you can't really see and you can't physically interact with it. You've just got to trust it's there, can be a bit daunting for people. And so one of the things that I've always been quite interested in as well, and another reason that I started looking at incorporating divination into energy healing, was giving people something kind of visual and tangible that they could focus on. So even if they weren't a fae with energy healing themselves, or perhaps didn't have the experience to maybe kind of engage in it fully, there was still something that they could do, or that I could do for someone else, that would help facilitate that healing, but was perhaps in a medium that they were more used to.
I
So I think
really love
that's,
this. Mm.
yeah.
Yes, it's almost like it's not exactly a sort of side benefit, because it's intrinsically linked, but I really understand what you mean there. There's a couple of things that jump to mind. So I use divination in many different forms in the work that I do, but the specific example that was just coming to mind then is, as part of a shamanic healing, I will often do a very simple divination before the healing that's kind of focused, like in very simple terms, kind of where the person is. And then for specifically talking about what we were just saying about, their role in the healing. What is it that they need to do? What is this healing, both in terms of the shamanic healing, but also like what is being called forth from them. And then the last, I use runes quite a lot as a divination. The last rune would be kind of, and that is, I guess, almost like a symbol of the intention, kind of like at the other end of the healing. And it's, that is supportive for sure for me and them, to give that clarity, give that sort of sense of context and the different energies at play. So I've certainly seen there's like that provides this kind of context and clarity and a bit of form to the healing, which you say, is made of fairly intangible stuff. And so there is definitely that provides this kind of structure. But what I was just hearing in what you were saying that I love is this notion of, and this is something that I think any of us that kind of work quite consciously with different symbols are aware of. It's like the power, like how much power is in a symbol, and how it's that invitation to like pull more forth from the mystery. And when we bring in a symbol like that, or even just open the space for a symbol to rise, because ultimately we're not choosing the symbol, how that then becomes something that someone can choose to continue to work with and keep coming back to. Like, this is something that holds power, holds gnosis, is a doorway for more to be revealed. And I love that way of recognizing, like, this isn't just to serve the healing itself, but almost acts as a North Star that can guide the person afterwards too.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've kind of been looking at recently. So I'm actually giving a talk at the International Witch Fest conference here in London in oh, next month. It's November. God, that's gone quickly. But the subject that I'm hoping to talk about is looking at tarot specifically, and how that can be used in more than just divination. And that is that kind of using a specific card with a specific representation almost as a guide, rather than just using it in a one-off reading. But how can you work with that energy to actually guide you along the path, rather than just yet relying on that one-off divination method? So I do think the symbols especially very, very interesting, in how people can kind of use that as you said, as the North Star to kind of guide them. And I think what's really interesting as well is, I mean, one of the other sort of divination methods which I quite enjoy working with in terms of healing is kind of, yeah, lithomancy. I've written a whole book about lithomancy, but I've got a specific set that I use, that is, there's a stone that represents each of these chakras, and then a stone that represents the four elements. And essentially what that does is you cast that and you perform your reading, and it kind of it tells you where or which chakra you should focus on, and then the element stones kind of give you actions to be able to
Mm.
go forth and say, oh, okay, to be able to heal the blockage in this particular chakra, I need to focus on doing these actions. And I think that's always a really interesting idea as well, is that when, we think about healing and our states of self, we've got our energetic self, we've got our physical self, we've got our mental self, and we kind of know deep down that they're all interconnected. But one of the things that I find very interesting about healing as well is not just looking at energy healing, Reiki and angelic healing and working with the chakras, but it's, how do we continue to acknowledge that those states of being are all interrelated? What physical actions can I perform to aid in this healing? What kind of mental shifts do I need? And what kind of, elements to do with my mental and emotional self do I need to focus on as well? And I think, especially when we're talking about symbols, just having that guide, that constant reminder, almost like a trigger that you can carry with you, that you can refer back to, just further helps you connect to that healing intention, and can kind of help you make it more a part of your day-to-day consciousness, rather than just kind of a one-off thing that you do.
Mm. I love that so much. It calls to mind a conversation I was having with a client this morning, um, which was a bit, I guess, more meta in some ways. But there
Yeah,
was something that it related to this, in that it, we're talking about a particular aspect of her life, which isn't really relevant to this part. But she was saying how sometimes she can be kind of pulled into looking at this aspect of her life in a bit more of like an outcome related way, and then we'll kind of look at almost like popular advice on that topic and kind of think, oh, that's what I should be aligning myself with. And the conversation we're in was recognizing most of our culture doesn't even understand that the soul exists, doesn't even understand that we have a soul, doesn't understand there may be any way of living that is in service of that. And at the kind of like most simple level, most people really could do a reminder that there's that, there is this, whatever language you give to it, but there is something more to them than just this material world and the physical body that's taking part in this material world. And even, for me, that's kind of like, this is my world I'm immersed in all the time. I'm constantly thinking and talking about our souls. you know, is something that I've primed my whole life, my whole world, my desk, this room with reminders. Um, like I was quoting, it always makes me quite emotional. I was quoting um a paragraph from a letter that Jung wrote in, I think, the final months of his life, and he says something like, "I failed in my principal task. My mission was to let people know there's treasure in the field, that they have a soul, and I failed." And it always makes me really emotional because I kind of like, he didn't, because there's people that are here and kind of carrying on that baton, because he one way or another, whether it was him or, you know, other people in this work, they let us know. And yet the truth is, right now, still most people don't know it. And so it's like, that's at a kind of more meta level. Like, we could just do being reminded that we've got a flipping soul. But to your point, I think when we're in a particular working around that, a particular alchemy, a particular healing intention, to have something that is like this touchstone, literally a touchstone, that keeps us, you know, coming back to that, I think is invaluable. Really is. I love that so much. And I think that's why what you're talking about there, you know, whether it be, you know, stones, crystals, runes, something physical that you can, you know, have in your awareness, touch with your hand, I think is really like an extra level of um bringing us back to this, that I think is, you know, it's not always appropriate to every kind of divination every time of healing, but I think there is something really valuable if there is a way of working that in.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, yeah, it's, and I think one of the things that we kind of neglect as well is that a lot of this is present in the natural world, and that goes for both kind of divination and healing. So one of the things that I've spoken about before, which is kind of every time I've mentioned it, people have gone, "Oh, I didn't think about that. You know, that sounds really, you know, really good." But before I moved into the place that I'm in currently, I used to live in an area that was surrounded by parks. And there was a particular pond in one of these parks that at certain points in the year would just get really overgrown with algae. And I found that that was a really good place to go and do divination by looking for symbols in the algae of the pond, almost like scrying. Well, yeah, like scrying, but using the algae rather than, you know, just kind of water scrying where you're just looking at the water. But that's, so that served as a divination tool, but also there's so much healing that you can get out of bodies of water and things like that. I mean, when I think about you know, the Irish ogham, and you can use, you know, staves for divination, but also you can use them to tap into the energy of the trees and use their specific healing properties. So I think whilst that having that reminder, that touchstone, as you said, is, you know, is it's a really good first step. I think the next step is also appreciating that it's also there, present in the world around you, if you just know
Mm.
where to look for it and how to look for it. I mean, you know, birds divination, I live in an area where there's lots of seagulls, so, you know, if I'm thinking of a question when I'm kind of walking down the street, well, not just seagulls, but lots of different birds as well. So I'll think of a question as I'm walking down and kind of look at the birds that appear and, you know, their flight paths and patterns to get an idea as to, you know, what the message of the birds is. But then you can then continue to work with the energy of that animal and use that in your healing as well. And I think, yeah, it's definitely a shift in consciousness, not just that divination can be used for more just telling the future, oh, I can actually use this as a healing tool, and then going from that, okay, I've got this specific tool that I can use, and then shifting from that to actually it is in the world all around us, and it's just about
Mm.
expanding your knowledge and your consciousness and actually kind of recognizing that and working with it in such a way that it feels natural rather than something you have to make a concerted effort at.
Oh, I love it. Honestly, it's like the different points of this conversation, we almost like planned them beforehand, because it's just so
I know.
perfect. um, well, I love that you've brought this up, because it was actually an oak tree that taught me divination in the first place. It was
Really?
yeah, before you know, I'd probably dabbled over the years, like most people do, with, you know, different
Mm.
tarot, whatever, but not in any way, not in any way that I would say I took particularly seriously or kind of used to make important decisions. And that completely changed as I, over the years, created this relationship with an oak tree that's local to me that I talk about all the time because it's been kind of like one of the most important figures in my whole life, actually.
Yeah.
Um, and as this relationship with the tree unfolded, it naturally kind of like invited me into relating to it in that way. We're like different. I remember in the kind of early stages of 2020 when the whole kind of COVID thing was happening,
Oh,
how
yes. Yeah.
much I was being told directly by the tree and the patterns that I was seeing in the bark, or different things that were happening to the tree, the branches, the wildlife around it. And I remember thinking one time, like, how on earth are people navigating this without that? Like, it was such an incredible thing. I'd go and journey up to the top of the hill to see this oak, and I might have something particular like that was going on for me or in the world or with my family that was like really in this kind of intense place at the time. Every time I'd go there and be shown something that was like directly like this incredible illumination, incredible insight. And so it's so interesting that even though that has been my experience, I don't think I would have, and I invite people into, you know, our students constantly are being invited
Yeah.
into relationships with the world around them, as this kind of course within shamanism, which is a very important part of the work that we do. There very much is that notion of kind of, you know, relating to the natural world around us in that way. What's interesting is I wouldn't have necessarily named that as divination. So it's interesting, like as you're saying, I'm like, of course, like this is so natural to us that we can find ourselves doing that without even knowing it as a form of divination. But I love that so much. Mm.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of hit again, nail on the head slightly there, which is I think especially when working with other people, whether that's divination or healing, I think kind of as you said, a lot of people they probably already engage in this, they just don't realize. And so I think a huge part of it as well is not just performing your reading or performing your healing for people and saying, right, here's your answer, wash your hands, off you go kind of thing, but it's also helping them to understand that they too can do this if they just engage in X way, Y way, etc. If you're if you're, let's say, for example, working, performing Reiki on a person and you notice that they've got a particular kind of block, let's say root chakra, then you can kind of recommend, oh, okay, you need to work more with the energy of the element of earth, and perhaps look into something like lithomancy. It uses stones that can be used to help you kind of work out where you need to go in the future. I mean, even if it's just a really kind of simple yes no set, you've got a couple of stones there, you cast them, yes no, it's just that way of, and you don't want to get preachy with people. You kind of don't want to say, oh, you should do this and you shouldn't do that, because again, everybody kind of learns in their own way and they have things that are going to be very specific to them. But I do think a huge part of divination and healing is teaching people to be able to do this themselves.
Mm.
Again, very dependent on the person, what they're into, what you kind of recognize that they need. But even if it is just that, recommending that, in the mornings, wake up, go for a walk, try to consciously feel the earth beneath your feet and kind of, listen for any messages that it's giving you. It is both that kind of divination and healing in the same context, in the same kind of vein. And I feel I've babbled a little bit there, but I'm hoping that I got to the point at the end of it.
No, I love this because I guess we all have a different orientation and a different way of perhaps naming the core intention of the work we do with others. But I would say the way I name it is that kind of like union with our own soul. But we, however we name it, I think we've probably all got that sort of orientation towards kind of wholeness, making whole, some sense in that direction. And the longer I've been in this work, the more I see that it's not really possible for that to happen when people are still relating to themselves and the world in a way in which the very thing that needs to be kind of made whole isn't kind of like in a context where it all is all interconnected. There is a kind of like context that union is happening within. And for that to even happen, there really does need to be a kind of opening and awareness to things that are in the mystery, are beyond the material. Like, this isn't something we can do to people. Ultimately, everyone has to be an active participant in our own healing, our own individuation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's here to kind of, I don't know, be fully fledged into this kind of magical worldview and be using divination and doing these things
Yeah.
themselves. But I do feel that this, again, using whatever words we want, what I just see so clearly now is a kind of animistic worldview is a human worldview. It's an innate worldview. It's our original worldview. And everything we're talking about here is really an invitation back into that. And that, I feel, is core to us coming back into wholeness.
Absolutely. And I think as well, just kind of whilst you were saying that, it kind of triggered something in my mind. But I think as well, it depends on what you're connecting with and reading with when you do your divination. So I think there's kind of three schools of thought as to what happens when you're performing divination, where the answers are coming from. The first is that you're connecting with spirits. I mean, whether you're doing that consciously, you may connect to spirits, deities, a divine energy, etc., to kind of give you the answers that you need. Another school of thought is that you're actually kind of talking to your subconscious, and it's not so much predicting the future, but it's bringing up kind of things that you've got buried there that you haven't realized yet, and that's actually what the cards or the stones or whatever you're using is illuminating. And then the third school of thought is that you are connecting with that, I tend to just go with the generic universal energy, prana, chi, but yeah, for me, I just kind of call it universal energy, and it's actually that's kind of giving you your reading. And I think that is always really interesting as well, in terms of how you then go forward. I think, me personally, when I'm performing divination, I don't tend to call on a particular spirit or a particular deity or kind of anything like that. Like, it's very much outside of the realms of how I perform divination. But I will always kind of make a conscious decision as to, okay, am I performing this particular divination because I've got something inside of me that I need to get to the surface, that for whatever reason I just can't? Or am I actually connecting with that universal energy to guide me and show me the way? And I think, especially when you want to relate that to healing, it becomes a very interesting question of not just what divination method you're using, but also, again, going back to that intention. And sorry, and is my intention more of almost like a shadow work-esque sort of internal healing, or is it I want to connect more with the world around me and that universal energy? Is it a very insular thing, or is it a very external thing? What is it here that I am trying to achieve? I mean, I know often we kind of say you need to focus on your internal self, and once you're kind of happy and strong within yourself, then you can go out into the world and focus on your place in the world and how you apply those lessons to living, yeah, in the external world, and how you interact with people. But I think divination, yeah, has another role to play in not just telling you how you go about doing that, but more kind of when is the right time and which energy specifically am I connecting with? Is it my internal energy or is it an external energy that I want to be connected with?
Mm.
So
Yes,
again,
I
feel like I'm getting
really,
a little bit rambly there.
no, not at all, not at all. I really think this is um something important to be aware of. And what I'm wondering, in your own work, when you may have that sense of what you're connecting into, how explicit would you be with whoever you're working with? Say, for example, imagine this is a healing context. How explicit would you be in terms of what is it you're working with as you're talking to them about divination?
So I think it all depends on kind of why they're asking for it and their personal situation and kind of the information that they give me. Especially when I'm doing divination readings, I tend to do long distance. I tend to do most of mine kind of, yeah, via online or chats or, a video call. And I always kind of make an effort to connect with the energy of the person as well as listening to what they're telling me. And I think that is probably quite an underrated element of divination as well. You can kind of ask people, okay, why are you here? How are you feeling? Where do you think these blocks are? But especially for those that do work with energy quite closely, I always find that it kind of helps to have that as a bit of a backup. I can understand that this person is telling me X, Y, and Z, but their energy is telling me, a little bit more, or maybe something a bit different that perhaps they don't want to face yet, or they haven't realized themselves. And I think we've been talking about how divination can kind of impact the way that you would approach energy healing. But I think energy can also impact the way that you do divination.
Mm-hmm.
And I think taking all of that into account when you're doing your divination reading for someone, it's about kind of recognizing not just what's there on the surface, but also what's beneath the surface that you're getting from this energy connection that you're kind of creating as you're doing this reading for someone, and conveying the messages of the reading in such a way that, as we kind of touched on before, gives them that kind of surface level of what it is directly that they're looking for, but also what it is that they could also do to kind of progress to the next level. Just give an example. Say somebody's come and said, oh, I'm going through a bad breakup. I want a tarot reading to tell me how to get over my ex. So you're kind of, you're talking to this person and you kind of get the sense from that connection that you have with them that, okay, they're having difficulties getting over their ex, but actually you can sense that there's more to it than that, and it's not just I've been hurt by somebody and I'm trying to get over that. You can tell that actually there's a deep dissatisfaction and a sense of, they don't have the self-love that they need for themselves. So in that situation, you can actually use your divination reading to say, oh, okay, I pulled my tarot cards and it's recommending that to get over your ex, you do X, Y, and Z. But also you should think about doing A, B, and C, which takes it a step further and gives them something that they can work with to heal kind of the deep root of the issue. And I think that's always very interesting as well. Divination, sometimes it is just that surface level answer that we want, but a lot of the time things are much more deep rooted
Mm-hmm.
than that. And being able to combine energy work and divination, not just, as we said, divination progressing energy work, but how energy can also
Mm.
progress divination, and just package this all up in a way that somebody can relate to and can go away and, again, as we kind of spoke about earlier, actually grow into themselves.
Yes, I think that's really beautiful to bring in, because I think with both topics that we've been touching on, divination and different forms of energy healing, there's a way to relate to them at a kind of more sort of surface level, which is a bit more kind of like, this is the problem, this is how to fix it. But really at the heart of that, there's almost always going to be deeper work, deeper healing needed, deeper patterns that are kind of just emerging to be seen. And I think recognizing that's true, whether you're sort of entering via a divination route or entering via the healing route and using kind of one in service of the other, they very much kind of are sort of two sides of the same stone. um, I remember, I don't know if you're familiar with the magician and author Aidan Wachter. He's been a past guest on the show a number of times. And I love it how instead of saying two sides of the same coin, he says it's like it's one stone. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of like it hasn't even got two sides, it's just one stone. And that just, it felt quite apt given your form of
Yeah.
divination. My goodness, I've absolutely loved this conversation, but we're running up on time. Is there anything that you feel that would be a kind of nice, like a kind of parting gift, as it were, to listeners? Something that we perhaps haven't touched on, something that you feel would be a kind of nice next step for them to enter into, just anything that you just think would be a kind of a good way of completing.
Yeah, I think, and we have touched about it in this conversation as well. But I think one of the things that has made a huge impact on my path in general is that notion of looking to the natural world for your divination, and also, using that same for your healing. So, as I said, the pond with the algae, using that for divination, but also using that to, kind of use the energy of the water to help heal, walking down the road to the gym or to the tube to get into the office, and doing that kind of initial bird divination, and then working with the energy of a particular bird that comes across. I think that has made such a huge impact to myself and my journey, and just kind of my connection with my own energy, with the energy of the world around me, that yeah, I really kind of recommend people think outside of the box. Like, don't just kind of read a book and say, oh, okay, well, it only mentioned tarot cards and oracle cards and lithomancy, so those must be the only forms of divination. Like, really kind of open yourself up and connect to the natural world, and see what else is out there that can kind of do that for you. I mean, it
Mm.
sounds really kind of easy and self-explanatory, but it is something that I find not a lot of people consciously or subconsciously do, and it's so rewarding, and it can make such a difference that, yeah, highly recommend that. It's something that have a look at your local environment and see what's out there.
You just called to mind. I'm seeing if I can find it quickly. You probably will know of it. The David White poem that's Everything is Waiting for You. I'm struggling to find it at the moment. Just the way you spoke about that, and just that relating to the world around us, like it's all here with us, alongside us, for us. And there's a line in it, it says something like, why can't I find this? It should be one of the most obvious ones that
So
should
I'm
leap
looking
out the
for it
book.
now as well.
Yeah.
One of us will get there.
It must be in this, like, oh, maybe it's new poems. I probably got a different book. Right, I now need to find it. I'm going to Google. You see if you can find it first. There's just a line or two that's so special and apt for this conversation. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to read a few of the lines that kind of just I recalled as you were talking. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. And then I'm just going to move towards the very last paragraph because it's so beautiful. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing, even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you.
That's beautiful. And yeah, just completely sums it up.
It really does. It really does. Well, my goodness, this has been a joyous conversation. Where
Oh,
can
thank you so
listeners?
much.
Oh my goodness, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Where can listeners find out more about you and your wonderful work?
So I'm mostly present online. I have an Instagram account that I'm quite active on. The tag is at the Cottage Mystic Witch, all one word, all lowercase. I have my own website, which is www.thecottagemystic.com. I'll admit I don't keep it as up to date as I would like to, but yeah, there's a blog, various articles, there's some free courses, mostly around kind of water witchcraft topics on there. I do also have a Facebook page, which is just Jessica Howard Author, but again, I'm really bad at keeping it posted. But if anyone's interested in any of my books, then you can check out my author profile on Collective Inc., which is the publishing company that I'm published with. Yeah, if you just go to their website and search Jessica Howard, then I should hopefully pop up. But yeah, I think those are kind of the main avenues.
Excellent. And we'll make sure that's on the show notes as well. Jessica, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. We went into so many different places I wasn't anticipating, but I just can now see we're absolutely needed and aligned. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll admit, kind of, getting into this, I was quite intrigued as to see where the conversation went. I didn't kind of really have, one particular thing that I thought I was going to talk about, but yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. And the thing I like about talking about these sorts of things with other people is that, yeah, you kind of get into tangents that you weren't expecting, and you come up with ideas, and your brain just starts going a million miles an hour, and yeah, it's definitely given me some more things to go away and think about. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure entirely. Thank you so much.